Okay, well, first thing I want to say is, Bill, I think you did an excellent job. I really appreciate you leading this off and doing the lecture. And I thought you did a good job in introducing it in your lecture. So, nothing that I say from here on out or do should put that into question. I think you did a good job. And I appreciate the fact that you're letting us be a part of this as well.
Right.
Jim, you got anything you want to say to begin with?
No.
Okay. Bill?
Yeah, well, I think this has been a threesome work, and I hope we can get this started today to begin focusing on these issues that are so important to us and affect us so much.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Your introduction talked a lot about how our lives have been disrupted by the COVID virus.
Yeah.
There are lots of people that have different opinions about what it is and where it came from and how serious it is. But one thing is for sure, our lives are not the same as they were a year ago.
No.
And what do you think about these people who deny the existence of the COVID virus or say it doesn't exist or that it's all a government plot? What do you think?
Well, I've always been puzzled by people who look at things and deny them. But it's psychologically, and being a psychologist,
Yeah.
I'm aware of that it's a very easy thing for people to do.
Yeah.
But it's pretty hard to disclaim 500,000 people who have been diagnosed as having died of this virus.
And we've all had personal experience. None of the three of us have come down with the virus, but we certainly know people who have, and people who have had experiences with it. We know people in our church that have come down with the virus and been very, very sick. A very close friend of my wife's has been in the nursing home. A former member of Norway has been in the nursing home now for, I think, 4 months in the rehab center. And at first in the hospital, they thought she was going to die. But she's getting better slowly, but it's just taking a long, long time.
Yeah. Have you had some friends
Yeah.
that you've known?
Yeah. I have a family member down in Kentucky, a cousin, that I got a call one day that he was testing positive for the virus, and he is up in his 70s, and he has some other health concerns. So I was very concerned, worried about him, and it was about a month later, I got another call and said that he was doing okay, that he had got through it without even having to go to the hospital.
Oh, and that's a fortunate thing.
Yes.
I have a good friend who is in late 40s, but he's a very big guy, and but takes care of himself pretty well and was being very careful, he said, but he got sick. And he kept denying that he was sick and so forth. And his wife said, "You need to go to the doctor." And by the time he got to the doctor, he said they had to help me to the car. And he said, "I like to have died." He was in the hospital for about 3 weeks.
Goodness.
Yeah.
And he was very frightened with it. And he's an old Marshall football player, one of my former students. So for him to be scared of anything always surprised me.
Big guy,
Big
football
guy,
player.
yes.
Well, what amazes me is this virus can there was a story about a young boy that he was getting ready to go to bed one night, and he told his dad that he had a sore throat, that he wasn't feeling well. So his dad gave him some medicine that they had there at home. And the next day, the boy wasn't doing any better. In fact, he was doing worse. So the father took him to the hospital, and the day after that, the boy died
Wow.
of the virus. So it can happen.
So
it can happen so
deny
quickly.
what you will, there are people dying,
Yes.
and big numbers.
And we know those who have, we may not have personal experience, everybody, with somebody who's died, although we've had messages from the church that have talked about people who've died, relatives who have died. So we certainly know people who have gotten sick and who have been seriously sick
Yes.
because of the virus. And I respect other people's belief, but I find it hard to believe that anybody hasn't been touched and could deny that the virus even exists.
Yes. Yeah.
As you said, Jim, you can't hardly go any place or do anything without having been touched.
It has affected every part of our life. Every part of our life.
You can't go to the grocery store, can't do anything without. And universities closed down. They're just now beginning to open up. Another question that comes to me, we've now got, I think the last I heard, Johnson & Johnson was getting approval for their
Yes.
COVID virus today, or at least had submitted documents to get approval for their vaccine. Are we too late with this book, do you think? Is this a book that missed its time?
Well, we were concerned about that early on because we were being very cautious because I had a lot of mitigating circumstances for myself with age and health
Yeah.
and so forth. And so we waited till I've got my vaccinations, both of them, and I felt much safer with it.
And
so we've
and
had
Janet had hip surgery too.
Yeah, and Janet had hip surgery. We had problems with that. But I thought about that. And then I began to think the issues that we're talking about will continue through this year. And not only that, I think what we're trying to deal with are issues that take place no matter what kind of problems that we face as God's people.
There's things that disrupt our lives.
Yes.
That change our normal schedule. And like you said, it probably will be something other than the virus the next time. But there are things that change our lives.
And it turns everything on its head.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think it's always appropriate to talk about better ways of kingdom living in the world that we're a part of.
Yeah. And as you pointed out in the chapter, in your lecture, and in the book, the church, this is not, okay, this may be a new virus, but this is not a new issue for the church.
Correct.
There have been pandemics down through the ages and illnesses down through the ages. And it's how the church handles this kind of thing that defines what the church is.
Yes.
And defines what the people of God are.
Yeah. One of the writers in one of the books wrote about this, and they talked about the Christians and early pandemics or plagues that affected these cities. And the writer mentioned about how people that had the means would leave the city.
Yeah.
And the people that didn't have the means, those that were poor, and also the Christians, they stayed behind. And the Christians were the ones who were ministering to those people that had contracted the plague. And it led some people to kind of scratch their heads and say, why were these Christians doing this?
Yeah.
Because they were putting themselves in a harm's way by doing this. And this is what I think we should look at about this virus. That what should we do? What can we do?
How do we live?
Yeah, and one of the writers mentioned about in the UK that when the virus first started, they were asking for volunteers. And they got such a heavy response that it was like, we don't know where to put these people.
Yeah.
But, you know, and you see on the news where people are going to the homes and bringing food, bringing groceries, or just simply making a phone call and saying, "Are you doing okay? Is there anything that we can do for you?"
And I think the writer that you were quoting earlier was looking at a document of a non-Christian who was scratching his head and saying, "How are we going to stop this movement? Because these people have done so much
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
to help those who were in need." And I believe, just like you said, Bill, I believe that there is always going to be an issue of some sort. Maybe it wasn't near as widespread, but we certainly had the same kind of thing in my memory several times with other kinds of pandemics and other kinds of plagues that hit us.
Yes. Yes.
So I think this is a very relevant topic that goes actually beyond COVID-19. In fact, I think the book could be titled just Kingdom Living.
True.
Okay, because we're always going to be coming into some kind of an issue. Speaking of Kingdom Living, I like your section on Kingdom Living. I noticed that you equated Kingdom Living with biblical thought and talked about biblical thinking and Kingdom Living, but I was a little unsure how those two related together. Can you?
I mean, I think what I was trying to get at was, first of all, it was defining the kingdom as being God's reign, His reign. So how does His reign in our life affect us? How does it make us decide what to do and how to do it? Even though some people are not, we would say, are not in the kingdom, they don't consider themselves even Christian, they still have responded in kingdom kinds of ways. That is, they're helpers. As you were describing, lots of people have reached out and cared about people and so forth. So in a general, the biblical thing was, if you study scriptures, you may not find, quote, the answer to something, but you find an attitude, a way of being that is apropos to this, I believe.
So foundationally, in defining Kingdom Living, we got to go back to the scriptures.
Yes.
We got to go back to the way Jesus talked about and defined what the kingdom was, and there are some people who believe that the kingdom of God comes after the second coming, that God's going to establish the kingdom here on earth. You didn't seem to agree with that, Bill.
Well, I guess my studies have led me to think of the kingdom as being, if God's reign. He does reign now, and He can reign in our hearts. But the finality of the kingdom in the scriptures is also when He returns, and there comes the fullness of the kingdom.
I
so
see.
The kingdom has been, in a sense, is, and will continue until its fulfillment when the Lord returns.
So to say it another way, those who have accepted Him now accept His lordship and therefore are in the kingdom. Others may not accept Him and not be in the kingdom. At some point in the future, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, and then it will be universal. But for those who have named the name now, the kingdom is now.
Yes.
It is not in the future.
Correct.
And so therefore Jesus could say the kingdom of God is among you, in at least one sense.
Yes.
Jim, you had something to add about this, didn't you?
Well, you brought up earlier about the kingdom mentality.
Yeah.
And Bill was talking about these 4 points about developing a kingdom mentality. And I think it's a good time to talk about this. The first point that Bill brought up was what matters in the kingdom of God and how to develop it in our daily lives. So, and Bill mentioned about those things that matter in the world. And you talked about that story about the jewelry shop,
Yes,
about the
yeah.
prices were changed.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a good illustration that what matters in the world doesn't really matter in the kingdom. And so that first point, how do we develop this in our daily lives? So that would be my question.
Yeah.
How do we develop?
And that's
This-
what I hope in the
this-
next 5 weeks
Yeah, we're
we
gonna
can do.
We're going to spend more time
Yeah,
talking about
yeah,
how to
exactly.
develop the kingdom,
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
kingdom thinking, so to speak.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Jim, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up?
No, I don't think so. Just briefly, I go back to that book by John Lennox where he talked about vulnerability and how vulnerable this virus is making us. But
Boy,
then,
that's for sure.
but then I go back to what Bill said about when the virus is gone, there will be other things that make us feel vulnerable and how we deal with that. And so that I guess will, when we get deeper into the kingdom mentality and developing this kingdom mentality.
Well, one of the things we might have people who are watching the video to begin thinking about, because we want them to join in different ways, and you'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things is that they can begin to look at how do these issues fit for them. The humorous story that I ended with about the guy's yellow dog.
Yeah, I loved your yellow dog
Yeah,
story. That was
yeah.
great.
Yeah.
But my question really with that is, I would like for people to begin thinking about, what is the bite of Matthew 6:33 for them,
Yeah.
because I think it's a foundation for how we approach the world.
Well, and two, we could turn that around another way and talk about the bite of the COVID virus into our lives.
Yes.
And whose dog is stronger? Okay.
Right.
Not that we approve in any way, shape, or form of dog fighting. Okay. But
Or alligator fighting.
of alligator fighting or any of it. But we live in a world that can create a fearful mentality.
Yes.
And how do you get rid of fear in your life? Which I guess could be another title for the study.
Correct.
And how to get rid of fear in your life. No, we appreciate the fact that you're with us, and we hope that you will respond to this video. Send us questions. Bill will be more than happy to answer any questions that you have. And correspond, let us know, and we will try to answer it, and regardless of who says it or what's said. Anything else, guys?
No.
I think we're moving toward that second session.
There we go.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, and we'll see you another time.